Just read this really interesting verse in Matthew, and I want to show it to you. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! Why, if the miracles had been done in you, had been done in Zoar or Sidon, they would long ago have put on sackcloth and ashes as evidence that they had changed their ways. But I tell you, it will be more bearable for Zoar and Sidon than for you on the day of judgment. The thing that stood out to me about that verse is the part where he says they would have put on sackcloth and ashes as evidence that they had changed their ways. The reason that stood out to me is that he didn't say they would have done all of these good deeds as the evidence that they changed their ways. They would have shut down all of their brothels. They would have cleared their streets of all of the unrighteousness. They would have removed all of the corrupt judges, right? It doesn't say that. It says they would have put on sackcloth and ashes as the evidence that they had changed their ways, which is strange because you would think that the evidence of changing your ways would actually be changing your ways. And so I believe there are two critical understandings that we need to take away from this verse. The first one is where the change originates. So often in this faith, we are taught to pay attention to what our hands are doing and not what our hearts are doing. This is why Jesus called the Pharisees whitewashed tombs, because they look perfect on the outside, but inside they were dead. And so in the same way, it is not our actions that demonstrate whether or not we have changed our ways. It is the heart from which those actions emerge. And I'll give you an example. The Pharisees would follow the law. They would fast, they would pray, they would give all of the appropriate tithes, they would do all the things that they're supposed to do by the law. And yet, Jesus called them snakes. Why? Because when you start to look at the actions that they were doing, even though the actions themselves appeared as though they had changed their ways, as though they were aligning their ways with God, you could tell that the way in which they did them was not in humility, but in pride. And this brings us to the second critical thing we have to pay attention to. Jesus says that the indication that they had changed their ways was that they took on sackcloth and ashes, which was a form of national grieving. Another way you could say it is the primary indicator that their ways had changed was not in going out and changing all of the things that they did, although that would be expected to follow. It was the origination of the change, which began in humility, which is why putting on sackcloth and ashes was the evidence of the change inside that would eventually find its manifestation outside in the changing of all of the things in their culture that had been corrupted that needed to be brought into alignment with God. That's the thing we have to remember. It says that God will judge the inner motives and the heart of a man. That tells us that God is more concerned about why we did a thing than what we did. Now, this isn't to say that what we do is unimportant. It's very important. It's simply to say that we should never be doing the right thing in order to try and be righteous. We should be doing the right thing in response to the righteousness, which is rightness with God, that was paid for by Christ's blood, in response to the righteousness that was freely given to us, which should birth in us a deep humility and a profound love for the one who paid such a high price for us to have access to the throne of grace in our time of need. So by all means, do the right thing, but check your heart, because if you're doing the right things for the wrong reasons, this is what Jesus says: you have already received your reward. Shh.